Samurai Shodown, a game that was instantly taking over the hearts and minds of whoever laid eyes upon it. With its big anime detailed characters, Japanese setting, eerie atmosphere and beautiful music, the Samurai Shodown series would go on to become one of the most important titles to lay the grounds for the fighting games genre that we have today. The series has been with us for over 25 years, and with the Samurai Shodown revival game coming up this year for all major consoles, let us take a look back at the importance and the history of this beloved series. This is the history of Samurai Shodown. The early 90s, a time where the video game industry was back with a bang. Home consoles were invading houses and kids were flocking the arcades. While adventure games and platformers were the majority type of games available on the market, a new genre was getting bigger by the day: fighting games. It was of course Capcom that changed the landscape with their Street Fighter series. The game took the world by storm by properly reintroducing the competitiveness of 1 vs 1 fighting game. Street Fighter 2 was it. Not only were kids playing the game in 1992, but they were living it. All the kids discussed were about how to do the moves and debating what is Ryu saying when throwing his fireballs. Street Fighter 2 was a massive hit. During the same time, one particular arcade-making company was starting to make a name for itself: SNK. In 1991, and only few months after launching its Neo Geo arcade and VS cabinet, SNK released their first fighting game, Garou Densetsu, or as we know it internationally, Fatal Fury. The game was a modest success, which gave SNK more reasons to focus on their fighting game genre. In fact, new titles were released in the few subsequent months. First was Art of Fighting, or as known in Japan, Ryuko no Ken, and the more successful Fatal Fury 2, which was a direct competitor to Street Fighter 2. During the same time, SNK tasked a team of around 20 people, led by Yasushi Adachi, to come up with the next hit for the Neo Geo arcades. The team, which later will be known as the Samurai Gumi, began initial work on a new title, and contrary to what you might think, the initial project idea was far from what the final product ended up being. In fact, the team started developing a side-scrolling action game featuring a number of monsters as playable characters. But Adachi, looking at the popularity of Street Fighter 2 was getting, as well as its West rival the bloody Mortal Kombat, and taking inspiration from both, he decided to scrap the original side-scroller idea and instead come up with a new fighting game that will introduce something new to the genre: weapons. But just adding weapons to a fighting game and keeping it conventional was not enough for Adachi and his talented team. In fact, the young game developers wanted to illustrate the terror of sword fighting and the impact of being cut by a katana, and thus the high damage moves were added to the game. In the first Samurai Shodown, for example, being hit straight on with Haomaru's A+C sword attack takes almost half of the player's life gauge. The idea was initially challenged and criticized by SNK higher-ups and requested it changed, but to everyone's delight, Adachi ignored their request and pushed the game as is for successful location testing in Japan. Adachi and team decided to make a game that takes heavy inspiration from Japanese culture, and thus the samurai setting was chosen. And as they were coming up with characters, the Samurai Gumi team decided to keep the game grounded in reality, by having some real historical Japanese figures and events be part of the game. One particular character comes to mind is Yagyu Jubei, or the game's boss, Amakusa Shiro Tokisada. The lore of the game was also inspired by Japanese culture. In fact, the series takes its story inspiration and some design choices from the 1981 Japanese cult movie Makai Tencho, also known in the West as Samurai Reincarnation.
Samurai Reincarnation. 350 years ago in Japan, thousands of Christians were slaughtered in the war against the shogun. But their dead leader would not lie down. he resurrected the fiercest and mightiest warriors in all Japan. What are you? Brought back to life for the final Holocaust which would destroy the Empire. An epic and bloody tale of violent revenge. Samurai reincarnation.
If the characters in this trailer appears familiar to you, that is because the movie features Jubei Yagyu, played by the veteran actor Sony Chiba, as he takes on a resurrected Amakusa. Not only did SNK use the movie's plot as a base of the game, but the design of Yagyu Jubei from the game is an exact homage to the movie's main character. On July 7, 1993, the first Samurai Spirits game was released in the arcade. The game will soon find its way in the West and Europe, but with a minor change. Right before its release, the SNK US distributor suggested a name change, since according to them, the word spirits did not have the same gravitas as its Japanese meaning. The word Shodown, correctly spelled, was first suggested, and later changed to Shodown without the W after the O, as a nod to the then popular movie Shogun. Upon its release, the game was a massive success worldwide. Samurai Shodown was a game regarded by many as ahead of its time. Japanese players could not get enough of the new title. In the February 1994 issue of the Japanese Gamers magazine, Samurai Shodown was awarded Best Game of 1993 in the 7th Annual Gamers Grand Prize, as well as being the first to win in the category of Best Fighting Game. The game also was awarded Best VGM, Best Album, and Best Direction, and came second place in the Best Graphics category. When it arrived in the West, Samurai Shodown kept winning the hearts and minds of both fans and critics. The game won multiple awards from Electronic Gaming Monthly in their 1993 Video Game Awards, including Best Neo Geo Game, Best Fighting Game, and even Game of the Year. It was also awarded Game of the Year at the April 1994 European Computer Trade Show. And to be honest, how could you not love the game? I remember the first time I laid my eyes on the title at the arcades back in 1993, looking at this amazing intro of a samurai warrior, or a ronin if you want to be politically correct, meditating in front of a tree under the light of 2 lanterns, before standing up and in a heartbeat, slices everything with his katana. The presentation of the game was fantastic. The game still looks beautiful today, and that is 25 years later. Samurai Shodown offered beautiful detailed graphics with amazing backgrounds and a unique roster. The title had 12 distinct selectable warriors: Haomaru, the series protagonist, and a brash heroic ronin who wants to prove his strength and also defeats evil; Nakoruru, an Inu priestess who hates violence yet still fights to protect Mother Nature. She is accompanied by her flying falcon Mamahaha, marking the first time characters in a fighting game can use their pets in battle. Ukyo Tachibana, a sick and dying swordsman who searches for the perfect flower to offer his loved one before he dies. Galford, a young American sailor turned ninja who travels to Japan in order to get strong and fight for justice. Hanzo Hattori, leader of the Iga Ninja clan. He serves the shogunate and is fighting to retrieve his son Shinzo, taken over by the resurrected Amakusa. Jubei Yagyu, a famous ronin hired by the Tokugawa shogunate in order to find and destroy the demon causing the suffering of Japan. Charlotte, a noble woman from France who is looking for the origins of the evil that has put her country in turmoil. Wanfu, a powerful general from the Qing dynasty seeking to recruit powerful warriors who can aid him in his goal of unifying China. Tamtam, a town hero from the fictional land of Greenhow. This mask-wearing warrior is fighting to retrieve the powerful Palenque stone that his village needs to survive. Kyoshiro Senryo, a famed kabuki performer who wishes to strengthen his dance through the sword fighting techniques. Earthquake, Texas outlaw who learned the art of ninjutsu and formed a gang of bandits looking for the valuable treasures. Genan, the only remaining design and character from the original side-scrolling game that never was. While he was supposed to be an anti-hero in the scrap game, Genan is an evil demon from the Makai world. His goal is to become more evil. Hamaku Sashiro Tokisada, the last boss of the game and a tragic character all around. We will talk more about him later when we get to the story of the game. All these characters have their own detailed backstories and intricate relationships between each other. I will cover more and cover each one of them in a future web series. Right after you choose your character, you go on tour in the world, fighting battle after battle. And right off the bat, you can see the little details which gives this series a unique place no other fighting game has ever reached. How your opponent jumps at you in the versus screen as the world map turns over to show your destination. How each character has a special intro that he does prior to the beginning of the match. All these little things can tell you how much work and dedication went into creating the first Samurai Shodown. If you were a kid like me in the 90s, then the first moment you saw the characters facing each other as the announcer is about to let you know to get ready, your jaws will be in the ground as you see how big and detailed these characters are. This was not your typical Street Fighter clone. These characters were huge and popping. The match started zoomed in, and as you get further from your opponent, the screen will zoom out. This scaling was something that first appeared in the Art of Fighting game, but looks infinitely better here in Samurai Shodown due to the beautiful graphics. You would also notice a clad wearing ninja looking holding flags in the background. This character will later be known as Kuroko, and he is one of many judges that basically act as referees to the bloody matches. Each flag in his hand represents a fighter on the screen. The moment a character lands an attack, Kuroko will raise the corresponding flag. The high craftsmanship did not end there. Samurai Shodown had at the time the most beautiful background seen in a fighting game. Background designer Tomoki Fukui was tasked of coming up with game stages, and boy did he deliver. The game offered the most detailed stages ever seen in a fighting game at the time. Galford stage, for example, was a docking port with ships and a huge number of sailors watching and cheering for you. Haomaru stage was simple but complex. The waves crashing as the players fight to the death was a sight to behold. Nakururu's stage was also another classic, as her family as well as a number of animals are in the background, following the match closely. While Samurai Shodown is a fighting game, comparing it to Street Fighter really does not do it justice. Unlike Street Fighter, where you had to go in and try to do combos, chip damage, and special attacks and get as much damage as possible on your opponent, Samurai Shodown required more concentration, and the matches were a lot slower, as you required to closely look at the screen and try to find an opening to strike a massive slash attack using your sword. Unlike any other fighting game, getting one full 8+C hit could take almost half of the opponent's life. Another cool feature of Samurai Shodown was when both opponents hit each other at the same time. Rather than just both getting damaged or nullifying each other's attack, the game goes into a mini clash mode where both players are grinding their weapons against each other. The player who mashed the buttons faster will win the clash, resulting in his opponent losing his weapon to the ground. Until he picks it up, the character with no weapon will have to rely on kicking and punching to find an opening and grab his weapon. Weapons, clashes, and awesome characters were not the only thing that Samurai Shodown introduced to the genre. If you look at the bottom of the screen, you would notice that each character has a second gauge. This marked the first time a fighting game had a second meter for its characters besides the life bar. The Ikari gauge, known in the West as either the POW or Rage meter, was a sub-meter that would fill as you get hit by your opponent. Once it reaches its limit, your character temporarily gains higher damage capabilities to all their moves. The POW gauge was something that was created by chance. Adachi came up with the idea but the actual inspiration came when the dev team were all playing Street Fighter II together for research purposes. Adachi was badly losing to the game background designer Tomoki Fukui and got quite frustrated. Adachi then was so mad because he lost that he was silent for a minute before suddenly getting up and shouting "Ikari Gauge" before jumping on the controller again and trying to get his revenge. It was then that the team decided to take that frustration, that anger, and rage that players feel sometimes when they lose a battle, giving them a chance to get back at their opponents. If the Ikari gauge was not enough to help turn around the tables of a match, Samurai Shodown had a run-in delivery man named Hikyaku that would show up randomly and throw something in the screen. This could either be a small energy refill in the form of a roasted chicken, or a bomb that could explode and damage either you or your opponent. While this feature might be seen as a game break-in in today's world of esports and competitive pro play, it was something that as kids we loved and enjoyed. Typical of other fighting games of the era, Samurai Shodown also offered the player bonus stages that would pop up every few matches as you fight your way through to Amakusa. While Street Fighter II allowed you to kick a car and break it with your bare hands, Samurai Shodown tested your reaction skills by having straw mannequins appearing suddenly and staying on screen for a couple seconds. Your goal is to cut them as fast as you can before they disappear again. Not particularly fancy, but a cool feature that would disappear in all future titles of the series. Music was also a home run in Samurai Spirits. Nori Otate was the sound designer for the first game, and he decided to use a selection of traditional Japanese instruments to give the game a proper Japanese feel. There were even instances where the music will stop entirely, adding a sense of dread and tension. Samurai Shodown's high damage aspect changed the world of fighting games forever. It created tension that was not seen in previous games, and there was less relying on just spamming one special attack after the other, as other players had to be very careful about their next move, since one miss can render your character open for a devastating killing blow. Speaking of killing blows, do you remember when we said that Adachi took some inspiration from Mortal Kombat when it comes to the eerie dark setting? Well, it did not end there, and another feature that was exclusive to the gory Mortal Kombat series found its way to Samurai Shodown: finishing moves.
Sub-Zero wins.
At the end of each match, there was always a chance that you could end up slicing your opponent in half, or draining them of their blood in true samurai movie style. These were not as graphic as fatalities in Mortal Kombat, and did not require any secret input, but they definitely did not go well with console companies at the time, and were the reason for the censorships that the game would eventually get when it releases on consoles. In terms of story, and like most SNK games, the Samurai Shodown series has tons of it, and unlike any other fighting game at the time, the Samurai Spirit storyline was filled with drama, tragedy, romance, and real history. The story of the first game truly begins in 1637, when the Christian minority in Japan who were oppressed by the shogunate started an uprising against the government. The leader of the rebels is Shiro Amakusa Tokisada. The rebels would take over the Shimabara castle and hold it as a stronghold. But they were no match for the shogunate's might. 120,000 soldiers were sent to deal with the 37,000 Christian civilians. In the end, every single Christian rebel was killed, and their leader, the pious and just Amakusa, who felt betrayed by humanity, was beheaded in public. 140 years later, the massacre and turmoil caused by the Tenmei famine and the shogunate inner fighting awoke the Dark Lord Ambrosia, ruler of the Makai world, a parallel dimension filled with monsters and atrocities. In order to find a way to our reality, Ambrosia will revive Amakusa's soul, who now despises humanity for what was done to him. But Amakusa Shiro was only a wandering soul with no physical body. In order to take form and be able to do his master's work, Amakusa took over Hanzo's Hattori's son, Shinzo, and stole the Palenque stone from Tamtam's greenhouse, using the stone to destroy the shogunate and also open a portal to bring Ambrosia to the real world. Our heroes, the selectable characters, will need to take the fight to Amakusa in order to stop Ambrosia from destroying all reality. The game's story is way more detailed than this, but for the sake of time I will not go into these details now. However, I will do so in my upcoming Samurai Shodown Bushido Tales video series, where we will discuss each character's story in details. With the immense success Samurai Shodown has gotten in the arcades worldwide, we knew it was only a matter of time before the game find itself on home consoles. The first port of the game came from the very expensive Neo Geo AES system. The AES was pretty much the same as the Neo Geo MVS arcade cabinet in terms of hardware. It used the same components, and games did not require any sort of porting, which is why the AES version of the Samurai Shodown was released in a little over a month after the arcade release. The high price of the Neo Geo AES and its cartridges did not stop the game from selling extremely well. In fact, the first Samurai Shodown still stands to this day as the most successful run of home Neo Geo cartridges ever produced. At the same time, Takara, a toy company from the 50s that has gotten into game development in the early 90s, started working on porting the game to the then home and portable consoles. The first port to be released was, interestingly enough, the Game Boy version, and that happened in June 1994. While the graphics took a big hit due to the low specs of the system, the essence of Samurai Shodown was there and the game was a blast to play with. The Samurai Shodown Game Boy version not only included all of the 12 characters, but also had 3 hidden fighters added. First was the game boss Amakusa, who was playable for the first time. Second, the referee Kuroko will also be playable and receive his own stage and story. And finally, Hikyaku, the delivery man from the arcade version. Not only does he receive his stage, he also got new special moves as well as a story to go along. Being the first home port version of Samurai Shodown outside of the very expensive AES, the Game Boy version of the game sold quite well and was very well received. Many fans and owners of the 16-bit consoles used this version as a way to tide them over until the Super Nintendo and Genesis versions were out. A couple of months later, Japan first saw the release of the game on the Super Nintendo, or as Japan knows it, Super Famicom, and received a highly entertaining live-action ad for it.
Super Famicom, Samurai Spirits.
Takala.
On November 1994, Samurai Shodown was released on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis in North America. Both versions handled by Takara, but each different in their own way. The Super Nintendo version offered the entire cast of the 12 characters and a hidden playable Amakusa, as well as Dolby sound. The version was heavily censored though, and omitted all blood and finishers. Also, the graphics were smaller than that of the Neo Geo or Sega Genesis, as the scaling was not present and the game stayed in the zoomed out view. Nevertheless, presentation-wise, this version was the closest to the Neo Geo. On the Sega Genesis, the characters were bigger, as the game stayed on the zoomed-in state. Unlike the Super Nintendo version, the Sega Genesis kept some of the gore. The presentation was a bit subpar and the character Earthquake was nowhere to be seen. Even with all these technical limitations and changes, both versions received rave reviews at the time and both sold quite well. Other ports of the game were released in the subsequent months. A portable Sega Game Gear version was released on December 1994, which only had 9 characters, and despite having better graphics than that of the Game Boy version, it was a very poor port that did not play well. A 3DO and Sega Saturn version of Samurai Shodown was released in 1995. While both close to the original in terms of the arcade's graphics and keeping the gore and finishers untouched, they both suffered from annoying loading times due to the then slow CD reading speeds technology. As the years went by, the game would become available on every major console since the first PlayStation, whether through the Anthology release or through the Aka Neo Geo digital titles. Getting your hand on the first Samurai Shodown today is quite easy. Samurai Shodown's massive success pushed the title into different medias. In 1994, SNK teamed up with the Japanese Fuji TV channel to produce the story was ridiculous. The Samurai Shodown motion picture was dubbed by ADV in the US, who handled distribution. You can still pick it up today on DVD for nostalgia. In Japan, Samurai Shodown has also taken over Manga Magazine. The game received a huge number of manga adaptations that ranked from mediocre to really damn good. While we cannot go through all of them, the couple ones that really stood out were Samurai Spirits Makai Bugeicho by Kiyoshi Nanatsuki, which was translated and distributed by Viz Media in the US as the Samurai Shodown comic book. The manga is a one-volume adaptation of the 1993 game, which did take some liberties and added some original characters. The second adaptation, which is closer to the source material, is Samurai Spirits Haomaru Jigokugyo by Shiro Ono, the artist that will go on and design art for Samurai Shodown 3D game, as well as the Samurai Spirits RPG. The manga is more of a prelude to the game. A second volume would be released the following year, which will adapt the story of Samurai Shodown to the game. I'm happy to reveal that you can read both these mangas for free and in English at our website www.kofworld.com, as well as a number of other SNK mangas that we are translating for the fans to enjoy. It is clear that Samurai Shodown is one of the pillars of the fighting game genre, and we will continue to explore how the series evolved throughout the years for better or worse, and which other mediums and milestones the samurai fighting game franchise has reached. In the next episode, we will talk about the game's multiple sequels and how they fare and how they evolve from the original game. Until then, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. Also make sure to visit us at www.kofworld.com for the latest Samurai Shodown news, reviews, as well as a huge and increasing number of SNK mangas to enjoy. Until then, thank you for watching. I am your host Struggler, and thanks for stopping by.